Yes. So I have my two warrior sisters with me here, Sandra Delaron and Hilda Anderson Pierce today. And I'm really honored today to be here in front of you to be part of this very historic announcement to put in place a red dress alert pilot that will be launched in the province of Manitoba. And this is thanks to the hard work of families, survivors, and grassroots leaders. This is a historic moment and a major step towards ending the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse peoples. I'd like to express my deep gratitude to the advocates and Indigenous women and 2S LGBTQIA+ individuals who have worked tirelessly to get us to the point we are at today. This is yours today, not mine. This is yours. And this includes the work of lifelong advocates like Hilda Anderson Pierce, chair of the Families and Survivors Circle, and Sandra Delaron, executive director of Gaganaway Manik, whose work has been essential during the initial consultation phase. I would also like to acknowledge the personal dedication of Minister Anandasangaree and MP Dumoff, as well as the Government of Manitoba, for initiating the pilot under the direction and leadership of Minister Fontaine. As members of Parliament have unanimously agreed, the crisis of MMIWG2S+ is a national or Canada-wide emergency. Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA+ peoples are roughly 6 times more likely to be murdered than their non-Indigenous counterparts throughout Canada. And in Manitoba, they are 19 times more likely to be murdered or missing. A red dress alert system will notify the public when an Indigenous woman, girl, or gender diverse person goes missing so they can be brought home safely. And while we celebrate this historic moment, it is critical we remember that our work is not done until a red dress alert is no longer needed. It is time that all levels of government recognize Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQ+ people as rights holders. That is why I will continue working to push for policies to end gender-based violence, including supporting a guaranteed livable basic income with my bill that's coming forward on May the 8th, Bill C-223, in response to Call for Justice 4.5 of the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. And I will continue to work with my federal NDP colleagues to push for more affordable housing with rent geared to income and greater support for shelters and permanent housing. Safety from violence is a fundamental human right, and it's also critical we do everything we can to end the ongoing genocide against Indigenous women and girls, 2S LGBTQIA+ people. And while we celebrate our progress, this Red Dress Day, on this Red Dress announcement day, we will continue working alongside families, survivors, advocates, and Indigenous women until everyone in our community is brought home and is safe. Thank you very much. Now it's my honor to call to the podium Minister Fontaine.
Miigwech, Leah. So first off, I want to acknowledge all of the MMIWG2S families that for the last 40 years have sought to bring attention to the crisis of MMIWG2S from coast to coast to coast, and the epidemic levels of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited. We are only here because of the work of MMIWG2S. Coupled to that, I want to acknowledge all of the Indigenous women again, for the last 40, 50 years, who have attempted to draw attention to the levels of violence against Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited, and have been on the front lines of advocacy and fighting to prioritize the protection of Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited. I want to acknowledge, and to that end, I want to acknowledge MP Leah Gazan, Sandra Delaron, Hilda Anderson-Perez for the work that they've done, not only for today's announcement, doing that really, really important work of community engagement, that really, really transformative work in Parliament, to actually have our voices heard on the floor in Parliament, and to get motions like the one that MP Leah Gazan was able to pass, and the work that MP Leah Gazan has brought to Parliament that has drawn attention in that seat of power that allows us to do this work and allows us to partner with the federal government in a good way. I'm so honored to be standing here with Minister Anandasangaree as well, a couple of days before the Red Dress Day, to announce this joint partnership working together with Canada and Manitoba to institute a Red Dress Alert. Manitoba, as many folks know, is ground zero for MMIWG2S. And so I think that today's announcement is so important because, yes, we're ground zero, but also we have been taking a lead across the country in respect of solutions and the work that needs to be done collectively, all of us together, to tackle and dismantle the violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited. And today is a perfect example of that collective work and that blood, sweat, and tears of Indigenous women and MMIWG2S families. So, as the minister responsible, I am so honored to be a part of this announcement. I'm so honored to be able to work in partnership with Canada. And we look forward to, as MP Leah Gazan has said, to a day when we no longer need a red dress alert, to a day when our women and our girls and our Two-Spirited can walk down the street and be safe, and know that they're safe, and know that they're valued, and that we collectively lift up and empower and give liberation to Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited, so that we have all the opportunities that every single other person in these territories has. So I'm grateful for everybody being here. I'm grateful for my sister colleagues, and I'm grateful for my colleague, my Canadian colleague here. I'm not sure if there's any questions. I didn't even stick to it.
If you be so kind, what do you think that the effect of this system is going to be here in Winnipeg and in Manitoba? Do you think that some of the tragedies that we have experienced here in Manitoba could have been prevented had there been this alert system, had there been this implementation in place?
Yeah. So first off, I think one of the things that's really important to understand is that this is going to be a project, a community-based project, that we're going to work with those that are on the front lines of working with MMIWG2S and have the expertise to be able to execute this red dress alert. So there's that community partnership, that collective government partnership, but more importantly, and I think that my colleagues, my sister colleagues can attest to this, is that this signals a red dress alert, establishing a red dress alert signals to Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited that their lives matter. That we are putting in the effort and the resources and the coordination that should they go missing, your life matters, and here's our response to that. That will be the first time that that's a tangible, on-the-ground signal that Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited matter, and they deserve to be protected. And so, this will go a long way to also help coordinating a lot of the work that's going on across the province here in Manitoba, but certainly will also be a best practice for other jurisdictions across the country when they are ready to do that work as well. I don't know if you wanted to answer as well.
Look, it's critical that we move forward on this. What we're doing today is in Manitoba, which is in many ways the epicenter of this crisis, enable local communities and Indigenous people to be able to develop a system that is appropriate for Manitoba. And we are hoping to scale this to different parts of the country. In fact, the intention is to have it across Canada. And we know that within hours of someone going missing, the more information the public knows about this, the faster it is and the more likelihood of that person being found. So to your question, yes, even if it saves one life, it would have been worth it. And we know that the alerting systems overall have been very, very useful. It's not the only solution, but it's a critical starting point for us to address the immediate crisis that exists.
Is there a timeline in place? Sorry, is there a timeline in place
Yeah,
as to
exactly. That was my question.
Oh, my
like,
apologies.
yeah. Is there like a timeline? Is there like by when will it be implemented, and how in terms of technicalities? Are you going to partner with any kind of a communication department, like a telecom department? How will it all be implemented?
Yeah, so we're having those discussions internally among the ministers that are also on the periphery, also responsible. So we're having those discussions as we speak, actually for the last little while. And then we'll be having those discussions with our community partners and really doing an analysis and an engagement of how the community would like to see this executed in the community. But again, I think the most important thing is that this will be done in partnership with community and with government, which is the first time that it's ever happening.
And which are these community partners, if you could name some of them?
Well, for instance, Gaganaway, we've got Bear Clan, we've got Mama Bear. So we'll be engaging with a lot of those, as I said earlier, that are already on the front lines doing this work. I think anybody in Manitoba knows the good work that Bear Clan and Mama Bear do in respect of those searching and also disseminating that. So Manitoba is unique in the sense that in some respects we have a little bit of that infrastructure that we can coordinate and work together. And then this is those much needed resources to do it in a more comprehensive, robust and comprehensive way.
We are used to present the red dress alert as the amber alert, but for Indigenous women. In what ways this is different? I'm thinking here about the discussion we had a month ago or 2 months ago about the fact that sometimes we have to protect the Indigenous women who want to live from maybe domestic violence and do not want to live.
Do you want to speak to that? Do you want to speak to that?
So thank you so much for your question. Through the consultations, what we found is unlike an Amber Alert, there's other considerations. Sometimes people don't want to be found for different reasons, perhaps fleeing violence, for whatever reasons. And so I have confidence that Minister Anandasangaree and Minister Fontaine will work together in the development of a system that addresses some of the differences in terms of implementing this kind of a alert system. And I really do feel that Manitoba, as Minister Fontaine indicated, has the infrastructure in place, has the expertise in place to be able to do it thoughtfully and safely.
Maybe for Minister Anandasangaree, can I ask you to speak French by any chance?
Un petit peu. I can give you an answer afterwards if you wish. Yeah.
Maybe first in English if you are comfortable.
Sure.
To do something else in French, that would be great. But could you explain us a little bit how you invest in this program? You are talking about supporting. How much more are we talking about?
So Budget 2024 establishes $1.3 million towards a pilot over 3 years. It is essentially a starting point to have the required conversations and establish the partnerships with local communities to be able to go to the next steps. Certainly this is not an adequate amount for us to implement the system itself. It is a very important starting point and will also give us the ability to scale up once there's agreement on what the going forward is. As the 16 consultations have indicated, and on top of that, I've had a number of consultations in smaller settings, and I'm sure Mr. Fontaine has as well. There are some fundamental concerns that exist. For example, what's the role of policing? What is the role of community organizations? What if somebody does not want to be found and is safe? And I think those are questions that will need to be answered. And there is no right answer. It is about ensuring that the people who this is supposed to impact trust the system. The families trust the system. So we have to build something that is worthy of that trust, which means that it needs to come from the ground, come from people who have that lived experience.
Minister, you had mentioned that this is part of budget 2024, and there has been some criticism that this is the only amount that's been put forth regarding MMIWG, emphasis around MMIWG. Does your government see itself contributing any more in any other way or supporting efforts to address the crisis?
The work around MMIWG is critical. This is a national crisis. From the outset, from the time we formed government, we called for an inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirited individuals. There's 231 calls to justice, and those calls are being responded to. We have a national pathway. We have contributed to developing an action plan, but there's concrete things that need to be done. While investing in housing, while investing in transitional housing, we need to continue to close the gap. We need to continue to do the preventative work that's required. At the same time, we also need to ensure that law enforcement is evolving. We have Indigenous-led policing services that are able to have the trust of communities and individuals to be able to do the reporting. So to your question, there is a lot more work to do, but I believe we're fundamentally on the right path. And this is one that cannot be done just by the federal government. It requires partners like Manitoba and Minister Fontaine. It also requires municipalities. And I think that's the work that really lies ahead of us. But make no mistake, this is a crisis that, in fact, we can end. But it requires all of us to work together, and it requires sustained efforts by all levels of government.
Is there a timeline as to when it will move outside of Manitoba and become a nationwide red dress alert? Like, what is the goal for the federal government to have this implemented Canada-wide?
There are a number of jurisdictions that are appropriate testing grounds for this, Manitoba being the primary one. There's areas in British Columbia, for example, where there's a great deal of supports, but also challenges. For example, northern British Columbia, the Highway of Tears, as it's sadly called, or Yukon. And I do think there's need for additional pilots, but this is going to be the central one because it will enable us to have a longer, broader view of what an alerting system looks like. Within a place like British Columbia, there's different, Vancouver is very different than northern BC. So we believe that this can be the driver for us to be able to scale. Now, I cannot give you a timeline on this because a lot of it will come down to the amount of work that's done by partners. But when we're ready, I can assure you that we will move forward as a federal government, of course, with the support of the province of Manitoba.
And I think those will look very different across the country as well. Like, I know what you're saying, this national red dress alert, and maybe at some point it will. But for the time being, I would submit to you that probably jurisdictions will look very different on how they execute this red dress alert. So I think folks need to be very cognizant, like the minister is saying. There are very unique and specific considerations that jurisdictions are going to have to meet. And as I've said, Manitoba is very unique across the country because we have been ground zero for so long that we have infrastructure that we can get running on this.
And also the question of, are you involving the police also to send out the alerts?
We're going to be looking at that, but certainly we've got a good working relationship with the WPS and the Brandon Police. Of course, those will be relationships that we will also nurture in respect of the Manitoba Red Dress Alert.
Some of those that you mentioned, the like ground zero and having the infrastructure, is that why Manitoba was chosen for this pilot project?
I would imagine so, but I'll let him speak.
Well, it also speaks to the leadership that we have in Manitoba, right? And Mr. Fontaine was part of the IFPT on MMIWG and Two Spirited People back in February. This was her first term. She came there within weeks of being sworn in. Premier Canoe has been absolutely resolute from the first meeting I've had in terms of supporting this. It's not accidental that MP Gazan represents Winnipeg Centre, again, an area that is deeply impacted. So I think there are a combination of factors, but I would go to the notion of leadership. We have a leadership that believes that this is an area that is important, that needs to be addressed. It's willing to be a partner with the federal government on this, and I believe that is the type of collaboration that's required for us to move forward on addressing this crisis.
So Minister, what happens, I know this is only being implemented in Manitoba for now, but what happens if an MMIWG2S is found to cross jurisdictional bounds in, say, Saskatchewan or different provinces? Will there be an alert released there?
I think it's premature, because those are very important questions that will be answered and that will be considered as part of the consultation. I do want to shout out, before even government starts operating, I was in Halifax recently, and I met with someone who was very involved in developing a localized voluntary system for 4 Mi'kmaq communities within Nova Scotia. I do think that there's some really good testing grounds where they have had dozens and dozens of alerts post-pandemic, and that's, she believes that it's really saved lives. So I do think there's some really good efforts that are being made on the ground. Now it's time for governments to show leadership, and that's what we're doing today.
Ministers and MP, it's a little particularly poignant that you're announcing this today when just this morning we heard a verdict on a very important case for Manitoba, which is for Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, Buffalo Woman, and Rebecca Contois. I'm wondering, the murdered part of MMIWG.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you there. Yeah, we're going to follow. I think we all had an agreement that this is about this. We can discuss this when we're all done the questions here. We can take it to the side. Thank you.
Is the provincial government allocating any funds to this?
At this point, we are, but because we haven't had those discussions yet in respect of what that looks like, but we will have some resources to partner. Okay.
I know it's probably early days, but just in terms of any kind of criteria for issuing an alert, that'll be developed, I'm guessing, during consultation.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand that this will be done collectively with community, Indigenous women, MMIWG2S. The point that MP Leah Gazan raised about that there are some situations that an Indigenous woman doesn't want to be found for her own safety. And the minister, has brought up a couple of times that just in February we had a roundtable on MMIWG where we discussed the red dress, and that came up across the board from other jurisdictions. So we're going to be unpacking that and ensuring that we're doing that work, but collectively. So it is a little bit too early, but certainly we'll be having those discussions.
But you're not too afraid that more you add organism and person to the table, more that will take time to...
No, if you want something done properly, you have to ensure that all of the stakeholders and all of the voices that need to be there are there, and that all of the voices are heard. And I think that my sister colleagues would agree that in Manitoba, we do things collectively, where we hear all of the voices. Miigwech, thank you.